Greetings and salutations, my dearest friends. My name is Samantha, and today I'm going to be doing the end of the year book tag. Hello, how are you? How you guys doing? Welcome back to Vlogmas, and this week in Vlogmas we are doing all of the end of the year content, babes. I'm reflecting on my bookish year of 2024. To be honest, I had a really good reading year. I did. I had so many 5 stars. I feel like this was the year that I started reading more genres. I read romance and cozy mysteries and fantasies, fan fiction, like just living my best life, reading whatever the fuck I wanted, and I had the best time. I really did. So it's kind of nice to do tags like this and kind of take a step back and reflect on my reading throughout the year. At the time of filming this video, I have read roughly about 160 books. My reading goal is always set to 100. If you want to see the rest of my end of the year content, I do have my Vlogmas playlist linked down below for you. I've already talked about my most disappointing books of the year, and I also did a video where I talked about like my top 12 books of the year. Those were like the real highlights and spotlights. If you want to see me yap some more, go ahead and watch those videos, please. Watch all the way through, watch some ads, because your girl is really trying to quit her job in 2025. I'm kidding, kind of. Anyways, I'm so excited to do this book tag. I know a lot of people were doing this at the beginning of December, but I just wasn't organized, babe. So I do have the questions right here. I haven't really looked at them or decided what books are going to go with what question, but we're just going to vibe, and whatever book pops in my head, that's what you're going to get. Right, the first question, is a big one, and it is most disappointing read of the year. Yeah, we had a couple. I have 2 answers to this question, because I have one that I absolutely hated and I thought was like the worst book ever. And then I have one that was just okay and I didn't hate it, but I really had anticipated it to be a 5 star. So let's go ahead and talk about both. But I would consider my most disappointing book of the year is An Education in Malice by S.T. Gibson. I was highly anticipating this book. Okay, I have read other books by S.T. Gibson. A Dowry of Blood is one of my favorite books of all time. I'm absolutely obsessed with anything vampires, Dracula, Carmilla, just everything that has to do with vampire literature. I am so obsessed. You know, it's my thing. I love it. So when I found out that S.T. Gibson was coming out with a sapphic dark academia romance that was a Carmilla retelling, I was elated. I honestly, in the beginning of the year, thought that this was going to be my favorite book of the year. Went into it with very, very high expectations, and it just missed the mark for me. I ended up giving it 3 stars. Like I said, it is a sapphic dark academia romance following our 2 heroines who are academic rivals and vying for the attention of a professor at their college. The reason it was so disappointing to me is because I have read Carmilla, and I love that classic book so much. It's such a staple in the queer community and in vampire literature, but it really was not a Carmilla retelling, okay? It wasn't. I'm so sorry. I also didn't really love the writing style. When I read dark academia, I kind of expect a very lyrical tone, but this came off a little pretentious, and I didn't love our characters together. They didn't have enough time together. Everything just felt kind of like half done, if that makes sense. And in comparison to A Dowry of Blood, which is my favorite book ever, it just fell short. So although I didn't hate it, I gave it 3 stars. I just expected so much more, which is what made it so disappointing. And then the absolute worst book I read in 2024 was Enter the Multiverse by C. Rochelle. This is the 4th book in her Villainous series. This one was another super disappointing one because I absolutely adore the first 3 books in the series. The first 3 books follow male-male romances with the concept of superheroes and supervillains having a romance. And it has fantasy, sci-fi elements, but the writing style is very humorous, so it also kind of feels like a romantic comedy. Each book follows a different sibling in a very popular villainous family, and I just have raved about the entire series so much that I was super excited for the 4th book, and it was quite literally the worst book I've ever read. I do not like trashing books, but this one was garbage, okay? I don't even want to explain the plot to you because I simply do not want to waste my breath, but it was such a disappointing end to the series. There were so many plot holes. It follows a set of twins who share like a mind connection, and not only do they share every single thought, but they also share a love interest. I'm not here to ever yuck someone's yum, but this book gave me the ick because it gave incest vibes. Yeah, I hated it, and I was super disappointed, and I gave it 1 star. I think this was like one of the very few books this year I gave 1 star, so that was quite disappointing. The next question is a underdog book of the year. So something underrated. Oh, so many. So many. I read a lot of indie books. I don't typically read traditionally published contemporary books. So I feel like my reading taste is a little bit different from like what you would see on the Goodreads Choice Awards, if I'm being honest. For me, what was really underrated was actually a whole series by Lily Mayne. It is called her Goliath of Wrestling series. Right now there are 4 books in the series, and it is comprised of various male-male romances following these paranormal creatures who are professional wrestlers. The concept of this entire book is so much fun and hilarious and just a good time to read, but the romance itself are also very, very sweet. If you like paranormal romances, you will absolutely love this entire series. It's so hard to pick a favorite book from this series, but the newest release was so good. It's called False Comeback. You can technically read these books out of order, but I would totally recommend reading them in order because all of the side characters are absolutely amazing. False Comeback follows a romance between a ghoul and a royal fae. The two of them have been professional wrestlers at the same company for about 5 years, but they are not only sports rivals, but also they just like hate each other's guts. Our two heroes seemingly come from different backgrounds and have never really been able to find common ground. A lot of their attention is starting to bleed into their professional fights and matches, kind of forced to resolve all of the issues that they have with one another in order to keep their jobs. So like I said, strong enemies to lovers vibes, but oh my god, these two together, magic. This does have slight BDSM elements to it, a little bit of a praise and degradation kink going on, but holy moly guacamole, I love this series. It is amazing. Another underrated author, criminally underrated if you ask me, is Marie Renard. This is an author that I found on Kindle Unlimited. Guys, do not sleep on Kindle Unlimited, especially that section that says like books you may like. I read so much on my Kindle and I'm constantly downloading and reading ebooks on Kindle Unlimited that I feel like I have really curated like my specific reading taste, and I always find some of my favorite underrated books in that section of books you may like. So I had seen this author, Marie Renard. She is a relatively new author. She only has 3 books out right now. And again, this is another author for my paranormal romance lovers. She writes really unique male-male paranormal romances, and they're just so much fun. And that I ended up really loving is Mate Hub Legend. It starts off by following our hero, Richard Knotts, who is a werewolf shifter, and he is a professional sex worker, okay? He performs on the supernatural version of OnlyFans, and he's a superstar, okay? He is a werewolf shifter, so he's known for, knotting his partners. If you know, you know. He's also a total playboy. People are always falling for him, but he has a rule that he never lets emotions get involved when he is working. However, one day he ends up getting paired with a human and starts feeling some things. I love a reformed playboy trope that is simply my catnip. The plot may sound absolutely ridiculous, and it kind of is. It's fun and it's campy, but it actually is also really sweet. So perfect balance. Absolutely loved this one. She has some other paranormal fantasy type books that are amazing. My next question was a book that was overhyped. Now, this is a difficult question because I am not of the mindset that I believe that popular books are automatically overhyped. I think popular books are popular for a reason, and I completely understand that reading is subjective, and just because I didn't like a popular book, it doesn't make it any less valid. So basically, I do understand that my reading tastes are quite specific, and I try to listen and not judge, if you will. But there were a couple disappointing books. One of them for me personally is Butcher and the Blackbird by Bryn Weaver. Honestly, this whole series, because I did try reading the second book, Leather and Lark, and in fact, I DNF'd the second book. So essentially, Butcher and the Blackbird is a romance between 2 serial killers. These 2 characters are kind of like the Robin Hoods of society, right? They hunt down all the bad guys and kill them. All of the serial killers and the worst people, and they kill them, and they have sort of like made it a game between the 2 of them to see who could catch the bad guy faster, and it ends up following their romance. It's described as a super dark romance, and for me, it just missed the mark. It really did. It felt like it was just throwing a bunch of popular tropes in one book, but none of it really was done well. Yes, there were darker themes because they're serial killers and they murder people, but the actual romance was not dark at all. I have definitely read darker on AO3 fanfiction and Wattpad and things like that. I felt like the writing style wasn't as dark as everyone kind of made it out to be, because it was also trying to be funny, like a funny romantic comedy / dark romance. And again, I just didn't feel like it excelled at any of that, to be honest. Didn't care for the characters, wasn't rooting for them to be together, didn't feel like it was particularly dark. In fact, I felt like it was more so gross in a way that felt gratuitous and not contributing to the plot. So yeah, that, to me, for me personally, it was kind of overhyped. Another book that I thought was a little overhyped was like Emily Henry books. Oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. I know so many people disagree with me on this one, and that's totally fine. The only book I really loved by Emily Henry was Beach Read, and I have read some of her backlist and some of her newer books, and I just don't love them. For me, they don't feel like romance, like swoopingly romantic. They almost feel like women's fiction, which is not my vibe. I'm not going to trash her books because objectively I can totally realize why people love them. I just don't feel like I'm the target audience for them, if that makes sense. No hate, no judgment, but as a queer Latina woman, I'm a little bored, and that's all I'm gonna say. The next question is my favorite book couple of the year. That is so hard. That is so hard because there's so many. I think my favorite book couple was probably Lex and Luna from Serpentine Valentine by Gianna Darling. That is a sapphic dark academia romance with a little bit of a Medusa retelling and a revenge plot. You guys know I love sapphic books, and this one was just done perfectly. I loved both characters individually. I loved the romance. Just perfect book. One of my favorite books of the entire year actually is a dark romance. Like, this is actually dark. Butcher and the Blackbird, don't know what that was, but this is actually dark. It follows our heroine Lex, who in the beginning of the book gets assaulted by someone that she thought she could trust, her college professor. Obviously, the entire situation is totally devastating, but when she comes forward, it makes it even worse when nobody believes her. In fact, the president of the university is trying to cover everything up and pretend like nothing happened. The president of the university was also one of her mentors, so she feels very betrayed. When she comes back for the next semester, she comes back with a vengeance, okay? She wants revenge against the man that hurt her and everyone who tried to cover it up, and in doing so, she decides to seduce the president of the university's daughter. That's where our heroine Luna comes in. Heroine Luna is at a place in her life where she is discovering her own sexuality, and it ends up following their romance. Perfect. Just perfect romance. Loved the women empowerment vibes in this book. Number one, our characters are so badass. That's why I love them together and individually. I think the writing style was stunning. This is the type of dark academia I like, where it feels lyrical. There were so many Greek mythology references because it was a Medusa retelling, so many pop culture and literature references. It just was the perfect book with the perfect characters, and I loved it. So Serpentine Valentine by Gianna Darling, those were my favorite characters, hands down. I still think about them constantly. Next question is fave main characters of the year. I guess I could have answered the same book, Serpentine Valentine. I love Lex and Luna. But to be honest, my number one favorite character of the entire year was Tress from Tress of the Emerald Sea by Brandon Sanderson. This was the year of me reading fantasy books, like epic fantasy books. And I read Brandon Sanderson for the first time and kind of introduced myself to the Cosmere. And boy, oh boy, do I love Brandy Sandy. I love his books. I think he is so perfect. Okay, I don't even have words. I love him. I love his fantasy books. I'm quite literally a fangirl at this point. Trust of the Emerald Sea is a epic fantasy adventure book with a loose Princess Bride reimagining. It follows our heroine Tress, who lives surrounded by the Emerald Sea. Tress of the Emerald Sea. And the sea is not what you and I would think of, like a sea with water. In fact, it is composed of spores, and these spores move by gusts of wind. The best way I can explain this, and actually it was my dad who kind of used this explanation when he read the book, is to think of like a hockey table where the air is allowing the puck to move, and then if it stops, it no longer moves. That's essentially how the sea works. However, it is super dangerous because if the spores gain any contact with liquid, a drop of sweat, water, any type of liquid, they explode. Each spore is a different color and has different dangerous reactions to water, so it is forbidden to travel the seas unless you're given permission by the king or you're doing some type of trade. So our heroine literally never expects to leave her island until one day her best friend and the love of her life, Charlie, is sent onto these seas and never makes it back. She decides to go on this super grand adventure to save the best friend and love of her life. It follows her book. It is a true adventure book. Our heroine, Tress, is amazing. I love the way that she was written. She's so strong. She's so independent. She's a freaking female pirate, and I love her. I absolutely love her. I think Brandon Sanderson did such a fantastic job writing her character and writing this book. If you are like me and you were intimidated by Brandon Sanderson and his backlist, this is an amazing place to start. In fact, Brandy Sandy himself says it is a good place to start if you don't want to jump into his really like thick, large, crazy books like Way of Kings or the Mistborn series. This one feels a little bit more accessible. It's shorter. It's part of his secret projects. You can read it as a standalone. You will not regret it. I love it. All of my romantasy girls need to tap in to this book. Same thing with You Mean the Nightmare Painter. That was another secret project that I loved, and I loved those characters in it so much. So Tress of the Emerald Sea is for my adventure fantasy girlies, and You Mean the Nightmare Painter is for like my romantasy girlies, because that book is incredibly romantic. This question is a book that surprised you. I don't know if I was like surprised by any book. Let me give this a think. Suddenly every book I've ever read has just escaped me. Okay, a book that surprised me probably would be Half a Soul by Olivia Atwater. This is a fantasy historical romance. That's kind of how I would describe it. End of 2023. So many people had this in their list of like favorite books of all time, right? So in 2024, I was like, let me read it and see like what's going on. And I love this fantasy book. It follows our heroine who at a young age is cursed by a fairy and the fae world. Her mother made a deal with a fae and quite literally promised her firstborn, to like servitude. The fae comes to collect her and quite literally kidnap her, and her cousin helps her defend herself, but she doesn't leave unscathed. She ends up leaving cursed, and it's like her soul is split in half. That's the reason this is called Half a Soul. All of the parts of her that are emotional and can actually feel things are taken out. So she goes through this world never feeling like true emotion. As she is a little bit older, her and her cousin decide they're going to try to break this curse. So she ends up heading to London right during the Regency time period in search of the king's magician. The hero specializes in magic, and she tries to get him to help her. This is such a good fantasy book, and I love that it is set during a historical romance setting, because you're getting all of the tropes of historical romance, the pomp and circumstances, the balls, but you're still getting a magical fantasy element to it. And although many people liked this book, I was still surprised how much I personally liked it. Again, this was the year of me getting more into fantasy books. I feel like in years prior, I really was reading historical romances, Omegaverse, fan fiction, things of that nature, and I hadn't really leaned into fantasy as much as I did this year, so that was a pleasant surprise. Next question is a new favorite author you discovered in 2024. I feel like I've mentioned a couple, like Lily Mayne and Marie Renard. Those were definitely authors that I started reading this year and really enjoyed them. But a contemporary author that I just started reading kind of like at the end of 2023, the beginning of 2024, was Rebecca Genshak. Rebecca Genshak writes some of my favorite sports romances. I really do love her. I think I've made it pretty well known that I typically don't love popular contemporary books, just because sometimes I get a little bored, okay? Sometimes I just need a little something extra. But something about the way Rebecca Genshak writes her books, I eat them up like candy. One of my favorite books that she wrote this year was Burnout, and this is a sports romance between a professional gymnast and a motocross rider. The hero does motocross, and he has quite the reputation of not being a team player, but he desperately needs to make a team to continue his career. He is spending the summer training, and one of his friends ends up recommending our heroine. When our hero meets our heroine, he kind of underestimates her. She's this really pretty, small, petite, blonde, and he literally thinks that she's like some type of dumb blonde, but our heroine is actually super badass. She is a Olympic gymnast and definitely puts him through his paces. So it starts off as a grumpy sunshine, opposites attract romance. I also really liked Playbook, that is a football sports romance and has a grumpy sunshine pairing as well, but the heroine is the grumpy one in that book. And I just love her writing style. I think she's really good at picking popular tropes and honing in on them and making them her own. And I just love her writing style. I could totally see myself going back and reading all of her backlists, reading all of her new releases. Just, we vibe a lot. So I'm really happy that I read more of her books this year. Next question is happiest read of the year. That's a tough question because I don't really read happy books. I don't know. I don't read happy books. I don't. I like books that are emotional and books that make me cry. I'm a Cancer, so I tend to cry a lot. I'm quite sentimental. I'm also like a character-driven person. I love feeling like a connection and a romance between characters. So like, I don't know if I've read any happy books this year. I did really like Broken Ice by Marina Vivancos, which is kind of a wild pick because her books are actually very emotional and they tend to make me cry. But this one was so fun. This is a part of her Alpha Omega Hockey series, which is a sports romance set in a Omegaverse universe. This is also a male-male romance. It follows our hero, Bo, who is a professional hockey player, and he's also an Omega. Really struggled in his career because hockey tends to be like an alpha-dominated sport in this universe. Ends up getting traded to a new team, and he's really nervous because there is a player on the team that he thinks absolutely hates him and is like judging him for being an Omega. There is quite a misunderstanding between the two, though. Bo struggles with a medical condition which causes him to have very frequent and painful heats, and the only thing that makes them better is having a compatible alpha. And guess who is that compatible alpha for him? Our other hero, the alpha on the team that he thinks hates him. So they kind of go into this friends with benefits situation. The reason I'm tagging this as the happiest book of the year is because our hero Bo is such a freaking brat and hilarious, and I just loved the two of them so much together. I love this book. Marina Vivancos is one of my favorite authors of all time. So her books do tend to be emotional, but this one is actually really fun and sweet and kind of like a good place to start if you don't feel like bawling your eyes out. Next question is most frustrating book you read in 2024. Well, obviously Enter the Multiverse was super frustrating because like twins sharing the same love interest. Yeah. Another frustrating book for me personally was probably Powerless by Lauren Roberts. I was really excited for this book because, again, I was in such a fantasy mood this year, and I loved the concept of it, okay? It was giving, like, early 2000s, Hunger Games, Divergent, dystopian fantasy vibes, and I feel like it had so many good ideas, but just poor execution. There was a lot of plot holes, not enough character development. I really hated our heroine in this book. She was absolutely insufferable. So it was kind of frustrating to have a book with such a cool fantasy concept, but just see it so poorly executed, if that makes sense. The idea was there, but the magic system and the world building, the characters weren't fleshed out, and it just left me feeling irritated. This question is best adaptation of the year. Would Wicked the musical count? Right? That started as a book. I'm gonna say Wicked the musical. The Phenomenon. The Phenomenon? The Phenomenon. Am I pronouncing that word correctly? I think I'm pronouncing it correctly. Any hoozles, Wicked the musical. Okay, so hyped, right? Everyone was excited about it, and it was amazing. It was amazing. It was fantastic. Cannot stop listening to the soundtrack. The visuals, the acting, the songs, everything was a hit. What a perfect adaptation. I feel like with musicals, it can be really difficult to do right because inherently people remember the first version they saw of that musical, like the first time they saw it on Broadway or the original actors on Broadway, and they tend to compare, but like the actors themselves did such a good job at keeping the amazingness of Wicked, but also making it their own, and it was truly so amazing, and it's one of those things that is so hyped and so popular right now, but totally worth and deserving of all of it. Next question is the longest book you read this year. That's so easy. It was Manacled. That is a Hermione, Draco and Hermione fan fiction from the Harry Potter universe. Essentially, if Hermione and Handmaid's Tale were just melded and mushed together. Actually, did I read that this year? I don't know if I read that this year. I think I read that last year. Shit. Fiction tends to be really long, so I also read Chasing the Sun, which is another fan fiction, but that one is between Snape and Hermione, and that one was also pretty long. I think it was like more than 1,000 pages. I also read a lot of Brandon Sanderson, and his books are also in the thousands, like Mistborn and The Way of Kings. So I read a lot of chunky books this year. Next question is the shortest book you read this year. I read a lot of novellas, to be honest. The shortest book I read is Showing Skeleton Song by Shannon McGuire. This was a novella, a part of her Wayward Children series. The Wayward Children series is actually one of my favorite series of all time. Fantasy adventure books, kind of with the idea that there are doors that lead to different universes and magical worlds, and it follows different sets of characters and children that are finding their doors. Some of the books follow these children in their magical world, and then others follow them as they are abruptly thrusted back into the human world and trying to figure out how to cope after they know how magical other universes can be. A lot of them get sent to this school. It's called Eleanor's School for Wayward Children. As they are there, they're learning to acclimate back into human society or trying to desperately find their way back to the doors. Skeleton Song is a novella with a character named Christopher who kind of lives in the underworld, if that makes sense. Very similar to like Coco and the Book of Life vibes. One of my favorite characters from the entire series, and it was a fun novella. Next question is my favorite cover of the year. So some of my favorite covers are these. This is the Dragons of Ember Hollow series by Tessa Hill, who is one of my favorite paranormal authors. I love the way she does her covers and her branding. She released all 3 of these books, I think, in 2024. Like, all of them. Okay. The way she plots out her series and writes them so quickly is honestly a thing of beauty. And I love how all of the covers go together so well. The sprayed edges are absolutely stunning. Like, just her branding is just perfect. I love books like this. Anyways, the first book is called Twilight of Embers. It follows our heroine who has really struggled throughout her life. She has lost her parents at a very young age. And now she is headed to college, really trying to make a life for herself. But when she gets to the college campus, she ends up meeting our heroes. It is a reverse harem dragon shifter romance. She ends up meeting the heroes and having such a strong connection with them, and then quickly finding out that not only are they dragons, but they're also her fated mates. Heroine is a female dragon shifter, which is actually very rare. So she has a lot of people hunting her and wishing her harm, and her heroes have to protect her. The entire series is incredibly fast-paced. They do end on cliffhangers. Miss Tessa Hill loves a cliffhanger, but it's a completed series, and I could literally see you finishing this in one weekend because it's very fast-paced and you will just be completely enamored with her world building. I love her. I really do love Tessa Hill. I eat her books up like candy as well. So love her covers, love her books, love her branding. Just, I'm a huge Tessa Hill stan. Next question is a book you haven't stopped thinking about. So many. Where do I even begin? You Mean the Nightmare Painter by Brandon Sanderson. That book was beautiful and so incredibly unique. One of my favorite fantasy books of the year. Serpentine Valentine by Gianna Darling. Definitely my favorite romance of the year. I really resonated with that book and how it kind of like described the general queer experience because I related to it so much on like my own coming out story. So I just thought it was perfectly done. Serpentine Valentine came out in February, and I think in the reading vlog that I did for that book, I titled it like, I found my favorite book of the entire year. And I really did. Like, that has stayed true in all of the hundreds of books I read this year. That one right there, I still think about, and I read it in like the beginning of the year. Next is the cringiest book you read this year. Ah, that's funny. Miss Jessica Kane is back, guys. If you're not familiar with Miss Jessica Kane, she is wild. She's a novella author that writes on Kindle Unlimited. Just the most bonkers books. They're super camp. They usually have an age gap, usually have a zaddy kink, and they're just crazy, unhinged. She came back this year. She started writing novellas again, and I'm super excited because sometimes I do just want a bonkers, steamy novella. Sometimes I want that, okay? Her books are that perfect balance of being so bonkers, so crazy, so cringe, hence the question, but somehow being really amazing as well. I don't know. Literally pick any Jessica Kane novella and it would fit under this prompt. I feel like that is Jessica Kane's vibe. Cringe, but fun. Next is, what was the highest and lowest rated book you read this year on Goodreads, and do you agree? Oh, I don't fucking know. Let me actually go to Goodreads. I think they give you this stat in like the year in book section. The highest rated book on Goodreads that I had read this year was Mistborn by Brandon Sanderson. 100% agree. Had a 4.48 average, should have had a 5-star average. That book is perfect, okay? Classic, epic fantasy vibes. Essentially exploring the idea is if the chosen one in a fantasy world were actually evil. Follows our characters. They are called the Ska, and they are a group of people who have been treated terribly by their leader and are coming together in like this rebellious group to overthrow the government. I love it. The magic system, so incredibly unique and explained in a way that feels very accessible. Brandon Sanderson is new to me, but I know he's not new to the people. He is one of the most popular and hyped about fantasy authors there is, if not like the #1. But I think it's totally valid, totally makes sense. And then it's not showing the lowest rated book I have on here, but it's showing the least shelved, and it was A One Woman Job by Jessa Kane. Yeah, that makes sense. Jessa Kane books are very polarizing and they're crazy and bonkers, so it does make sense that they have low ratings. Next question is book with the most unique concept. I would probably say Yumi and the Nightmare Painter. That fantasy world that Brandon Sanderson has built was so incredibly unique and beautiful, and it has such an amazing discussion of art and how AI can never really capture like what a true artist can. And I loved all of the underlining meanings and just the world building, the magic system, the romance. It was so incredibly unique. I always struggle to describe this book because of how unique it is, and I just encourage everyone to read it, especially if you are a romance reader trying to get into epic fantasy. Like, this is the perfect place to start. Book you read that you would reread. I feel like I would go back and read like Warbreaker by Brandon Sanderson and Mistborn, because his Cosmere universe is so large. All of his books fall into the Cosmere, and you have like cameos and side characters throughout different books that really help if you've read his entire backlist. Like, all of it starts to click together. You can read them as standalones, like it's totally accessible, but if you have read his backlist, then you're like, oh, all the puzzle pieces start to slot together, and that's definitely something I can see myself doing. When I make my way through his Cosmere, I will probably go back and kind of enjoy those more subtle side characters and cameos. Another book I could see myself rereading is probably A Body in the Bookstore by Ellie Alexander. That was a cozy mystery series that I just loved, and I truly enjoy Ellie Alexander's cozy mysteries. Body in the Bookstore is her first book in the Secret Bookcase mystery series. It follows our heroine Annie, who lives in a small town in Southern California, and she works at a mystery themed bookshop. She ends up hosting a mystery festival in her small town. A lot of the small businesses end up getting involved, brings in a lot of tourists, but also people from our heroine's past. A lot of her old college classmates end up coming to this town, and one of them is found dead in the bookstore. A body in the bookstore. So she needs to figure out what is going on. I really liked this one. It felt very different from other cozy mysteries because our heroine felt a little bit more advanced than your average sleuth, because she studied criminology in school, and the detective on the case is actually one of her old professors. I could see myself rereading this one because it had a lot of different subplots. Obviously, there's like the main murder that's happening that she's trying to solve, but there's also a lot of dark secrets in her past and a murder that happened when she was in college. So I can see myself like reading the series first and then going back and rereading again to get all of those like red herrings. I love Ellie Alexander. I reread her books all the time, and I'm a huge fan of all of her cozy mysteries. The next question is reading goal reflection and my 2025 reading goal. I realize I don't have to read books that are popular. I can read whatever I want. It doesn't matter if they're new releases, doesn't matter if they got released 20 years ago. It is never too late to just pick up whatever the fuck you want, guys, okay? I also realized that reading is fun. It is not a chore. For example, me feeling intimidated about Brandon Sanderson's like reading order and all of his backlists, and there were so many people online telling me I was reading books out of order and doing it all wrong. I don't give a damn. I don't give a damn. I'm just having fun, okay? There's no rules. I don't care if I'm reading series out of order. I don't care if I'm DNFing a book. I don't care if everyone has already read this book and talked about it. I'm gonna read it. I'm gonna read whatever I fucking want. That's my reflection, okay? Also, I love all genres. I love romance, fantasy, cozy mysteries, fan fiction. I don't have to pigeonhole myself into one specific genre. Even though I predominantly read romance, it's okay to dabble into other things, and I don't have to be like an expert of all things. Another reflection is I love anything with LGBTQ representation and queer romances. I really resonate with them, and it has really helped me in my own coming out experience, and that has just been so lovely to see representation in books, and it's so important. Representation is so important. All right, that is the end of the year book tag. Thank you for being here and letting me share all of my favorite books and everything. I love you guys so much. I'm so grateful for the bookish community, and I love making videos. I love chatting with you, and it's just like mind-boggling that anybody gives a fuck what I say, okay? If you stayed this long and you enjoyed this video, leave me some firework emojis, because it's about to be the new year. We are ringing in the new year. There's gonna be fireworks. Our dogs are gonna be scared out of their minds. Poor puppies. But leave me some fireworks in the comments down below and I'll know that we're bookish besties. As always, thank you for taking time out of your day to spend time with me. It means the world to me. I hope you guys are all staying happy and healthy, and I will see you in my next video. Bye!